In August 1942, a unit of the U.S. Marine Corps launched an ambitious raid deep into Japanese territory. The attack was against Makin Island, now known as Butaritari, which is an atoll located in the Gilbert Island chain in the Pacific Ocean. At the time of the raid, it was lightly guarded and home to a seaplane base for Japanese forces. There were a number of objectives for the raid. These goals included destroying the seaplane facilities on the island, diverting Japanese forces away from American assaults on the Solomon Islands that were occurring concurrently, and gaining intelligence on the Gilbert Islands chain, one of the areas that American forces would later attack as part of their island hopping campaign across the Pacific. The troops were part of the 2nd Marine Raider Battalion, which was formed in February of that year with the purpose of acting like commando units, striking deep into enemy territory and retreating rapidly. They were commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson, who organized his units in a way that went against Marine Corps doctrine of the time. He placed non-commissioned officers on more equal footing with young lieutenants and gave them mentorship opportunities. Additionally, he also modified the structure of his individual squads to be composed of 10-person teams instead of 8, a change that was later adopted by the whole Marine Corps. The assault team was made up of 211 men spread across 2 submarines. They embarked from Pearl Harbor on August 8, 1942. Conditions aboard the subs were difficult for the 8 days spent traveling across the Pacific. All of the torpedoes within them were removed, excluding the ones already in the tubes. The temperature was around 90 degrees inside of them, with the humidity reaching 85%. However, the men were allowed 2 10-minute exercise periods per day on the sub's deck. The raiders set off from the submarines in inflatable boats at 3 a.m. on August 17th. Lieutenant Colonel Carlson changed the plan from landing at 2 different beaches to just the same one while the approach was taking place. However, in the confusion of the moment, one 13-man squad did not hear his updated orders and went to the other beach apart from the rest of the unit. Both elements of the attacking force landed by 5 a.m. The raiders had the advantage of surprise until one accidentally set off his rifle. However, they were still able to move across the roughly mile-wide island to form a line of attack. There were 3 groups of Marine raiders moving around the island at this point. Company A of the battalion was leading the movement across the width of the island, with Company B following behind as a reserve. The 3rd group of 13 men at the wrong beach operated independently from the 2 larger units. The 2 companies then turned southwest and advanced toward the area where intelligence indicated that the enemy forces would be. They soon encountered the island's defenders. Japanese forces put up a dogged defense throughout the day between well-hidden snipers and counterattacks, but they were heavily outnumbered, with 71 troops to the Marines' 211. The accidental landing of those 13 men on the wrong beach proved to be fortuitous, as they were able to ambush the Japanese defenses from a different direction while the defenders were distracted by the main attack. Additionally, the native islanders were useful allies for the attackers. They gave the raiders information about the location of Japanese units and structures on the island. They also carried ammunition for machine gunners and gave them coconuts for hydration. By midday, the defenders had suffered heavy losses, but the raiders were unaware that this was the case. 12 Japanese aircraft appeared over the island at around 1 p.m. 2 of them were seaplanes attempting to land in the lagoon and reinforce the defenders, but they quickly came under heavy fire from the raiders' machine guns and anti-tank rifles. One was destroyed and the other crashed when attempting to take off from the lagoon. The remaining aircraft's bombing and strafing caused no American casualties and mostly struck Japanese-occupied territory. The raiders decided to evacuate in the evening and attempted to use the inflatable boats to travel back to the submarines. However, many of the boats' motors were no longer working, and there was a surprisingly heavy surf. Only 7 of the 18 boats were able to make it back to the subs, so about 120 raiders remained on the beach. 20 of them had initially been left behind to cover the evacuation, and were well armed, but there were few weapons and supplies for the rest. Carlson had no knowledge of the strength of Japanese forces on the island, and he believed that they had been reinforced during the day based on inaccurate reports from the native islanders. Between this, his men's exhausted and wet state, and their lack of weapons, he made the decision to surrender without much input from his battalion leaders. Carlson sent out 2 raiders to find the enemy and give them a surrender note, which they were eventually able to do. He also authorized his men to act independently. A few dozen were able to make it back through the surf to the subs by morning. Additionally, several raiders went out to explore the island and killed a few Japanese soldiers. Nothing ever came of the surrender note that was passed along, as the evidence seems likely that one of the soldiers killed in the early morning hours was the one who had been given the note. The raiders' situation had substantially improved by daybreak. About 70 of them remained on the island, and the 2 men who had gone out to give the surrender note reported back that no Japanese resistance remained. The raiders organized themselves into patrols to search for any remaining enemy troops and finished destroying Japanese facilities on the island. The remaining raiders were finally able to evacuate from the island that evening. They had been able to contact the submarines during the afternoon and arrange a meeting point just outside the entrance to Makin's lagoon, where there was no surf. They were able to drag 4 boats across the island and use a canoe provided by the native islanders to sail 4 miles across the lagoon to the subs. The official casualties for the raiders included 18 dead and 12 missing. It's unclear how many Japanese troops were killed. Carlson estimated that it could have been up to 160 based on reports from the native islanders. Japanese records seem to be more accurate and indicate that 46 were dead. One interesting note about the raid is that the president's son, James Roosevelt, took part in it. He was Carlson's second in command for the raid and earned a Navy Cross citation for his actions during it. The results of the battle were mixed. It provided a substantial morale boost for the American public back home and proved the value of fast-striking commando units like the Raiders. However, it did not uncover any useful intelligence on the Gilbert Islands, and the historical evidence shows that it did not have any impact on diverting Japanese forces from the conflict in the Solomon Islands. In fact, it may have hampered future U.S. amphibious assaults in the Pacific. Due to the raid, the Japanese realized that many of their island chains far from active fighting were vulnerable, so they reinforced garrisons on them. This likely increased the number of casualties when American forces invaded the Gilbert Islands in 1943.